look at the newspapers and see the stories which are making headlines around the world. So Joe Biden has arrived in Beijing. The China Daily is taking a look at a report on the government there, asking the World Trade Organization to help settle a dispute it's having with the US about dumping.
The lead today in the Times is an interview with Romania's Labour Minister, who says Britain should be grateful for her countrymen seeking jobs in the UK. Restrictions on Bulgarians and Romanians working in this country are to be relaxed from January the 1st.
The Independent's front page headline, The War on Twitter. It refers to new steps to warn Twitter and Facebook users in case they prejudice high-profile court cases, this after a few notable recent examples.
The Financial Times front page says the UK government's pushing its US counterpart to allow the oil firm BP back onto its territory. BP's banned from winning US contracts following the Deepwater Horizon disaster of 2010.
The International New York Times reports on a new scheme in Amsterdam to lure alcoholics into work by paying them with beer.
And let there be light. The Moscow Times says the Russian capital has installed thousands of lights to counter complaints it is too dark after scrapping daylight saving time.
To light up your morning and your day, Mark Davies, CEO of the strategy consultancy Camberton. Good to have you with us.
Good morning.
Morning. Let's talk about China and how the China Daily is saying that there's a sophisticated approach that's being sought out by China to resolve this trade dispute, or these measures. Just explain what the issue is, first of all.
Well, the issue is that China apparently are dumping cheap product into the United States, and the United States are taking measures to stop that happening. And I'm not sure how sophisticated you would call this. I mean, they're reporting to the WTO, and the US have got 10 days to respond, and if they don't respond, then the WTO can take action. Well, ultimately, it's a story about money. Joe Biden's there wanting to talk about disputed islands and other things that a Secretary of State would be expected to talk about. And the Chinese want to talk to him about trade disputes, which shows that the Chinese hold the whip hand these days in terms of financial transactions.
We saw this, didn't we, with David Cameron being out.
We did, and he's been out there, and all he wants to talk about is business and British exports and trade.
It's quite interesting, though, because his trip coincided with a story about the EU putting new tariffs on cheap Chinese solar panels coming into Europe. And it's interesting how, the political leaders in these countries are desperately trying to get it together and broker deals. But obviously with Joe Biden, he's on a diplomacy trip, as it were. And yet, in the background, these spats are just ongoing.
Well, they are. Solar panels is one of the things that's being talked about in this case as well. I think it's because the Chinese have got money to invest, and they have done over the last few years. And the West, the United States, and the British haven't had money to invest. We've had this economic crisis that everyone will be very acutely aware of. And the Chinese, therefore, have been able to make ground in various trade areas. And the US and the British have pushed back. And the Chinese have decided they've had enough. And it'd be very interesting to see how this story is reported in the American press, because this is obviously the Chinese take on it. And I'm sure that the US side of this will be, we need to protect our workers and our product, and we're having cheap product dumped on us, and they've got to do something about it. And they will feel they're taking fair measures. The Chinese feel that they're taking unfair measures. The WTO, that's what it's there for.
That's what it's there, to sort out the spat. Let's talk about what's going on the front page of the Times. Now, this is quite an emotive issue amongst many in the UK.
We're going to get a lot of this over the next few weeks.
And the reason being is that from January the 1st, there are restrictions being lifted on Bulgarians and Romanians working in the UK. So what's happened here? Because the politicians are getting involved.
Yes, this is about the Romanian Labour Minister saying that the Romanians who are coming to Britain are coming to do the jobs that the British don't want to do. And actually the BBC did a very interesting programme on this about a year ago, where they tried to put British people into the sort of jobs that the Romanian migrants are, like fruit picking, low-level jobs that people were simply not turning up to the second day. So they'd go for the first day, they'd say, fantastic, I've got a job picking asparagus. They'd find that it was actually quite a strain on the back and harder work than they thought, and they didn't turn up the following day. Now, I'm sure not everybody's in that category, but the point being made by the Romanian Labour Minister is that the jobs are there and are being filled because other people aren't filling them, and that's why the
But
Romanians
it's
come and do
easy
it.
to complain about this when the economy is stagnant in the UK, as it is in the whole of Europe, and people are struggling to get jobs.
Of course,
to see the other side.
that's why I say that, you know, not everybody is going to be in the category at all of saying, "Well, I'm not prepared to take a job." But she is fighting the corner of the Romanians. And to be fair, Romania is characterised as if it's some kind of a backwater. My last business, when we set up Betfair 10 years ago or so, we put one of our technology hubs in Romania. They have a very thriving IT industry, so it's not as if it is all about vampires and all the other things that you characterise Romania as being.
Also, as well, she points out, and she's quoted in this article as saying that Romanians are meeting shortfalls in key UK professions such as nursing and social care. It's not just fruit picking, for example.
Indeed. I think her basic point is, you know, they'll take the jobs if those jobs aren't already being taken, and if they are being taken, then that's what they're available for.
What's happening with Twitter? We've had a couple of... It's happened quite a bit, actually. Celebrities are on Twitter.
Yeah.
Lots of followers.
And Facebook.
And Facebook.
Social media.
And they reveal details of cases that they shouldn't be revealing. They identify people they shouldn't be, because they're not seeing Twitter or Facebook as under the law, so to speak, or restricted by...
I would have thought that's partly why they probably also just don't realise that these things aren't there to be talked about, and for the first time they have a voice, so people are just putting out into the public domain things that they might discuss in the pub, and they're not seeing the difference between saying, oh, you know, so-and-so, and this is what I heard about so-and-so. They might gossip about it with friends, but there's a difference between that and publishing it on Twitter. So in a way, this is the judiciary also waking up to, you know, the power of Twitter, because it is a publication site, and it's everybody's means of having their own little newspaper. And the newspapers have one rule, but people in the pub have a different rule. And this is about trying to get across to people what you could say it should be sort of fairly obvious. You can't talk about things that would put you in contempt of court, but it's not obvious because people do it in the pub.
Right, let's have a look at the Financial Times, and they've dedicated quite a substantial part of the front page to the UK backing BP in the US and attacking a US ban on BP getting future contracts, saying it's an excessive move. What do you make of this?
This is a really interesting one, because we were talking about China a moment ago, and the numbers involved there were £8 billion in total across all the trade dispute that's being discussed. This is about a company which, as a result of a problem with Deepwater a couple of years ago, has had a $4.5 billion criminal fine and an $18 billion cost for civil penalties, which is hanging over its head. So the money involved here is enormous. And on top of that, they have been told that they can't bid for contracts. And the British government is very concerned about the impact that that's going to have in the longer term over their jobs and BP generally. It's interesting for a lot of reasons, not least of which, you may remember that a few years ago, BP rebranded. It's not actually British Petroleum at all. It stands for Beyond Petroleum these days. And yet it's the British government that's weighing in and seeing what it can do on their behalf. I would have thought the shareholding of BP is probably predominantly US. So it's interesting that it's the British government that's concerned about the jobs for BP, which was a British company but is no longer.
Do you have a quick word on alcoholics being lured back to work?
What would get you into work, first of all? So you've got me here at 6 in the morning and all you've offered me is a cup of coffee.
Oh, come on, we've got lemon cake in the green room. Got cake this morning.
This is a really interesting one, because the one side of it is, well, if you can get people into work and you can entice them in a way that relates to their lifestyle, then that's a great thing. But on the other hand, you don't want to give somebody who's suffering from ultimately an illness something which fuels that illness. And if you're an alcoholic, I'm not sure the best thing to do is to give you beer.
Very unconventional measures in Amsterdam.
It is. I mean, that's Amsterdam for it, isn't it? Let's see. I mean, ultimately, if they go and stay with the jobs, then it's got to be a good thing.
We'll see what the results show. Mark, it's always good to have you with us. Didn't get time to Moscow flooding itself with winter lights, but it's one big Christmas tree.
It is a huge tree.
Mark, thanks very much. Sally and I'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.